I appreciate it. Welcome, everybody, to our continuing discussion on political division, national divorce, whatever you want to call it, political polarization, effective polarization, social polarization, a bunch of names for what it is. Basically, you see that Americans are beginning to turn on each other, and it's not good. We've had the longest running interview series of professors, scholars, philosophers, writers, columnists, activists about what's going on. And we're providing the information directly to you, the public, so you can do this thing that was popular when I was in high school. It's not so popular anymore. We're trying to bring it back. It's called thinking for yourself. And you want to Wikipedia that or Google it? It's not a popular term now, so you may need to look it up, but we're going to try to do that. You're not going to be getting what I think from me. That's not the point. The point is to provide raw, informative information to you, and then you'll have to come up with your own opinion. So with us today is Professor Lee Jussim. He's in the Department of Psychology. He is a distinguished professor from Rutgers, the School of Arts and Sciences, and he works in the area of social psychology. He has been an assistant to the Distinguished Chair, Department of Psychology at Rutgers University. He's also been the chair in the Department of Psychology. He was the interim chair in the Criminal Justice Program, and he was the vice chair of graduate studies also at Rutgers. Some of the research he's looked into is predictors of leftist protests in the U.S. after the 2016 presidential election. How many psychologists use questionable research practices? Are STEM faculty biased against women? Associations between sensitivity to microaggressions, campus controversies, prejudice, and political ideology, and the Handbook of Accurate Personality Judgment Theory and Empirical Findings. A lot of his work is on how people perceive others and how they react based upon that perception. He is a professor of social psychology at Rutgers University and was a fellow and consulting scholar at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University, 2013 to 15. He has served as chair of the psychology department at Rutgers University. He received his PhD from Michigan in 1987 and has been at Rutgers ever since. He has received the Gordon Allport Intergroup Relations Prize and the APA Early Career Award for Distinguished Contributors to Psychology. He has published numerous articles and chapters and edited several books on social perception, accuracy, self-fulfilling prophecies, and stereotypes. His most recent book, Social Perception and Social Reality, Why Accuracy Dominates Bias and Self-Fulfilling Prophecy, ties that work together to demonstrate that people are far more reasonable and rational, and their judgments are typically far more accurate than social psychological conventional wisdom usually acknowledges. Today, we're going to be talking about this chapter in the book, The Politics of Social Psychological Science. I'm reading that now. I got it over there. The chapter is called Distortions in the Social Psychology of Intergroup Relations by Lee Jussim. Professor Jussim, did I get anything wrong with your bio? Is there something we need to correct about your bio, your background, or in your accolades?
That's good enough to get us kicked off and rolling here.
Okay. And not to lie, I'm in it too. So here's the book. You can see it on the cover. Here's the book. We're going to go over a chapter of one of these books. I was very pleased to be able to talk to you. What was this chapter about, and why did you write it in 2016? And before you answer, please come from the point of being someone who lives in America and has two eyeballs that work, in addition to your academic background. What's going on? Why was this an important topic to write in 2016? If I woke up from a coma over the last 20 years, what did I miss? Why was this an important idea?
Okay, well, so the social sciences in general, social psychology as a subset of that, conducts a lot of research, scholarship, analysis of stereotypes, prejudice, and intergroup relations. And most people know what stereotypes and prejudice are. Intergroup relations involves how groups, and almost any kind of group, they might be racial and ethnic groups, they might be cultural groups or political groups, might be organizational groups, interact with other groups. So that's what intergroup relations is about. And we wrote the chapter because my understanding of the literature, the scholarly literature in social psychology, was that a lot of it advanced manifestly wrong claims. And those wrong claims were consistently in sort of directions that would appear or actually would vindicate certain progressive left, far left narratives about intergroup relations if they were actually true. And so the chapter is basically on how political biases distort the social science literature. And, the root of that starts with the fact, and most people will be surprised to hear these numbers, even conservatives who will often be surprised to hear these numbers. But the social sciences in the United States skew massively, massively left. Like it's not like a 60 face. But even conservatives underestimate how massive the skew is. So at elite schools, whether it's elite liberal arts schools or the top tier research schools, the faculty are like 90 to 95%, and sometimes 100% left of center. And they are not just left of center. And this by their own, based on surveys and political party enrollment. This is not, like surveys where people are asked to say what their political identity or ideologies are. My most recent PhD student, the student I most recently advised through his PhD, Nate Honeycutt, did a survey, national survey of 1,800 faculty from across the disciplines at top tier universities. And not only were like 90% left of center, 40%, this is 40% of faculty self-described as radicals, activists, Marxists, socialists, or some combination thereof. 40%. There are typically like 1 to 3 or 4% conservatives, self-identified conservatives at these schools, which means in general, it's not that there are 10 times as many liberals as conservatives. There's about 10 times as many radicals, activists, Marxists, and socialists as there are conservatives on most faculty.
If I may, it sounds like what you're saying. I'm not a fan, but I do occasionally watch Fox News just to see. It sounds like what you're saying, that the Fox News hype is totally true.
I would say the Fox News hype underestimates the extremity of the skew.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really extreme.
Oh my God.
I have to say, Marcus, I mean, I'm left of center in my personal politics. I ran an indivisible group in 2017.
I don't like Trump. I'm a progressive too.
Yeah. So this is not about axe grinding. This is just the data. It is just the data.
I get it. And since you're bringing it up, I noticed that. So let me, if I may, run something by you. Been doing a lot of reading on political polarization, learning like you in the audience, doing these interviews, reading books on my own, etc. Trying to learn like you. And what I've noticed is that almost all of the professors who've written any book are from the left or from a left university. They may not, I will give them this, they don't go out of their way and say, I'm a leftist, I'm super lefty. But you can, and I respect that. I respect that. But you can kind of tell, right? If somebody looked close, they could kind of tell. I respect it. They are doing their job to be unbiased the best they can. They did not promote it. They want to be known for the research, nothing but respect. And they were totally professional, but it was also there. And all of the research, I think I saw one book or one article or one person out of 70 interviews who said something different. All of the research says 90% of political polarization is all the Republicans' faults and only 10% is the Democrats. Yeah, it's happening on both sides, but it's really just the Republicans, and they're the ones who are really exacerbating it. And yeah, it's the Democrats, but it's really a little, or it's only because of the Republicans, so it's really all their fault. 90% of it. That's what I've seen. And I know from, because I work in transportation, and I've had to do research on that. And I also became a specialist in climate change, and I had to do the research on that. That's how I got into this. I'm a data researcher, so I can understand lots of amounts of data. they would always acknowledge bias in the industry. So if you had 15 climate change studies and they all said climate change is going to happen by the year 2022, but every single one of those studies came from a professor out of Harvard, somebody would say, hey, we think climate change is going to hit in 2022, but we have to acknowledge our bias. All of our professors come from one university. That's not exactly a robust sample. We should look for additional research. I have seen that in many fields, transportation, climate change. I've seen that in engineering. No one says remotely anything like that in the field of political polarization. There's no recognition that it's mostly all leftist professors who've mostly all said it's all Republicans at all. No request for additional research and simply no recognition of that from what I can see. Now, maybe I'll read a book tomorrow and it changes, but I'm about this far in, 70 interviews in, and that's what I've seen. Is that a good thing for an industry to be totally unfamiliar and completely unaware of their bias and then hold their conclusions up as gospel? Or does that create something that the audience or public may question the validity of their studies, since nobody who disagreed with them was able to ever actually argue with them at their level?
Yeah, well, I think questioning is almost always a worthwhile activity. And sometimes the answer may be, boy, they did the study really well and it deserves credibility, even though it vindicates some left-wing perspective. I mean, there's kind of a split. I mean, I'm oversimplifying a little, nothing as simple as I'm about to describe it, but among researchers, between those who recognize and acknowledge their potential, the potential for their own politics to bias and distort their claims and their conclusions and their studies, and therefore engage in activities to limit those biases as much as possible. So there's sort of that. It's not exactly a camp. It's more like a style of doing research. But then on the other side, and again, it's not exactly the other side, but there's another style of doing work on politicized topics that goes something like this. Everyone is biased. My biases are better than yours. And so that liberates me to inflict my biases on the research.
God, that's an actual philosophy.
Well,
people say that with a straight face.
They don't say it in as simplistic terms as I just said it, but they basically do say it. I mean, I can cite chapter and verse. So.
We're all biased, and everyone's biased, and all we can do is try to do that. Sure, but that's why in many industries you will have a lot of different people from different backgrounds doing the research. So you have a lot of different people checking it out when you do the peer review articles. Like, I just wrote this peer review study that said apples are tastier than oranges, and I only ran that by people who like apples. That's legitimate, right? Right?
So what's really interesting is, in general, at least in the early stages of research, I tend to think that corporations are actually less biased than academics. And that's because they are in it typically to make a profit.
Right.
So whatever they're developing has to actually work. It has to actually function. And there's no incentive to promote some finding that is a bad finding or was conducted in a weak way. Now, after the fact, after an industry has been established, they'll fight tooth and nail to maintain their profits, even if the science says something very different. And there's two great cases in this. The cigarette companies fought tooth and nail against the science showing that cigarettes cause cancer, and actually the medical establishment long resisted the finding that bacteria is what causes ulcers, not stress. Because in one of the 40s and 50s, this idea that stress causes ulcers sort of came to the fore. Whole pharmaceutical, hundreds of millions of dollars were staked on treating stress as a source of ulcers. And so when I think it was Barry Marshall came along and said, no, that's actually bacteria. He was sort of dismissed for decades. He eventually won the Nobel Prize because he was right. But so after
Dismissed for
entrenched,
decades by the scientific community.
I'm sorry?
This guy comes up with something, say ulcers are caused by bacteria. His research is legit, but he's otherwise dismissed by the entire scientific community because of inherent bias.
Yeah. Because of, I mean, look, the pharmaceutical industry had a massive profit vested interest in treating stress. There was a whole set of drugs and treatments, right? And so that's after, once you have that vested interest, you get corporate corruption, basically, the equivalent of corporate corruption. But not in the early stages, I suspect they really want to get it right. Whereas in academia, it doesn't really matter if you're right. What matters is if you can get it published. And if it turns out that 20 years later, someone discovers that you're wrong, well, you already, you've had a great career already. Who cares?
This is a hard-hitting interview already. Wow. So it is possible for there to be bias. All I'm saying is I would have been more comfortable if I saw a couple people say, hey, most of the field is from professors on the left. Very few people talking about political polarization as professors on the right. And it is kind of interesting that most of us agree it's almost all the Republicans and a little bit of the Democrats. We should probably have more research on that. We should have somebody on the right check our assumptions. I'm used to seeing professors bring that up. I've seen nothing of that sort of language at all in anything that I've seen, any of the white papers or any of the books or in 70 interviews so far. So maybe it's there, but that doesn't seem like a good sign, right? Like we're trying to get everybody in America to agree, hey, here's this problem and we need to fix this. And what it's turning into is, okay, people on the right, half the country, we have a bunch of leftist professors who said it's all your fault. Great. I could totally see 78 million Americans go, right, let me jump on that and I'm going to listen to what you say. Or does that automatically feed into a Breitbart, Newsmax, Fox News narrative about how, they're out to get you and hate you anyways? And I'm just saying, this is a big issue. We need people to do this, and we need people to accept all the results. And the only way you can do that is by appearing to have included everybody, maybe get a couple conservative professors to do some peer-reviewed studies on you and back up some of your findings. So at least you're not going in saying it's, maybe somebody from Pepperdine or Utah or Arkansas State University goes, you know what? This guy out of Columbia, I hate to say it, folks, but he's got it right. I could see that making it more, user-friendly acceptance of, et cetera. But there doesn't seem to be much of that. Let me go back to the article. Why did you write this in 2016? Wasn't America working perfectly? There was no polarization in 2016, or there were new amounts of polarization that scared the hell out of us at levels we'd never thought imaginable?
In fairness, the conference was, and there was a conference that led to a book, was on political polarization.
Okay.
But my chapter here was really on intergroup relations, which is a piece of that, but it's not really the whole thing. But political polarization has been building for a very long time. And some of the, I think more honest and some of the best work in political science and social psychology has been tracking that for a couple of decades. And it's really well known and well established that political polarization, especially you referred to affective polarization, which is the idea that people just hate the other side. Even when they don't disagree with the other side that much, they still loathe the other side. That's affect, emotion.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always this way. And it's, that is more extreme now than it has been. And, it had begun to get bad, I mean, it's been getting worse for a very long time. People began to notice that it was getting particularly bad, in the 2010, late 2000s, early 2010s, and so it's out of that this conference and book emerged, brought together faculty who study aspects of polarization, and that ultimately produced the book. So
you're saying people were noticing political polarization was getting bad in the late 2000s, early 2010s. That's half a decade before Trump. I've interviewed 30 people who said it all starts with Trump. He's the fault. It's all him. If we get rid of him, it's going to. So who am I supposed? You're talking about, sorry, folks, things were already on the down slide 5 to 8 years before you ever heard of Trump. Are you saying all these people who say everything worked great before Trump and it's all Trump's fault are wrong?
Yeah, well, yes, they are, well, not completely wrong. I mean, Trump was a very sort of aggressive and divisive and kind of harsh and corrosive figure. I think Trump's rhetoric absolutely exacerbated polarization. I think that's true. Okay. But his appeal resulted in part from the fact that the country was already deeply polarized when he burst onto the political scene. So he both took advantage, politically exploited, not in a pejorative sense, the existing divisions and polarization, but I do think he also exacerbated it. Those are not mutually exclusive. So, yeah.
I've heard this phrase. Tell me what you think about this. I've heard some people say Trump would not have won the race if he had ran 10 years earlier. You had to have this pile of polarization for him to sit on top of.
Marcus, people underestimated Trump from the get-go. So maybe that's true. The country was not as polarized in 2006 as it was in 2016, but I would not. I have no idea what would have happened had he ran 10 years ago. It's a different game altogether, and I think Trump, for all his flaws, which I think are many and deep, it is vividly clear that he was politically unbelievably successful in a way that very few people realized. Had he done it earlier, I have no idea what would have happened.
They were just, the theory is that, from some, and I'm holding my opinion, is that polarization's been building for a while. Trump did not make it all bad himself. We did not live in a kumbaya land before he got here and everything, shattered the moment he got here. It was already going bad. The waterline was already approaching the lip of the boat. And all Trump did was push it over. And if it hadn't already been so bad before he got there, he couldn't have been as, if the country was not willing to listen to a polarized message, he would have gone nowhere. But they were.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think that's basically true, and that had been building for a long time. And I think it would go too far to say they wouldn't have listened to it earlier. I mean, I don't know what would have happened earlier.
Well, why was it polarized? Let's go back to 2006. What's going on in the early 2000s? Why do you think the early 2000s is where polarization started?
I'm not even, I mean, it had been building slowly for a long time. I don't know the data well enough to have an opinion as to, well, the country was less hateful and it was kind of stable through a certain point. But
personal anecdote, is there something you saw, something you felt at the time?
Well, I mean,
would it have been the way
you have Clinton's presidency, right? Clinton's presidency with, his sexual peccadillos, was very sort of, a lot of people on the right loathed him for all that. So you kind of had that. You had the abandonment of, what was it called? The equal time thing for media in the 80s, so that, media no longer needed to even make an effort to be balanced, politically balanced. And so you had the rise of left and especially right-wing media ecospheres, which then created echo chambers. So you kind of have that in the mix. And then you had the 2000 election, which was, whatever, the first time in 125 years that we had a president who lost the popular vote, but was elected into the office by the Electoral College.
Right.
So, if you're going to ask me what the foundations were, I'd put it on those types of things.
What about the Iraq War? People, I think it was half the country was protesting going into Iraq, and the other country was half the country was all about it. Would that have been a polarizing event?
At the time, people overwhelmingly supported you're talking about the second Iraq War.
The second Iraq War, yes, under George W. Bush. Second Iraq War, 2005.
Yeah, that was more controversial because there was the whole weapons of mass destruction. But once you have some level of polarization, almost anything can, and as we have seen in the last 5 or 7 years, does become controversial. So, it certainly was controversial, but there were always controversies. You go back decades, there were always political controversies. The Republicans in the 30s called FDR a communist and a socialist. Truman referred to Dewey as a fascist, right? Right? You always
if we're going to do that, John Adams called Thomas Jefferson, or one of the guys he was running against in the presidency, a transvestite. So you can go all the way back.
I did not know that.
You can go all the way back to the beginning.
The polarization and the vitriol in the 1790s is the Civil War was worse, right? The country broke apart in the Civil War, but the polarization and vitriol in the 1790s is reminiscent of what we have now. It was really bad. People don't know that history because, you need to know the history. But the Federalists, Adams and Washington and that whole group, often accused Jefferson and the Republicans, or the Democrat Republicans, of wanting to create a French style revolution complete with the terror in the United States. And the Jefferson's group, the Democrat Republicans and Madison, accused the Federalists of wanting to bring the country back under British rule, under the king, or else install Washington as king. So it was incredibly vitriolic, and it was incredibly polarized.
That sounds horrible to hear that it's similar to now, because I could see where people would be polarized in 1790. The country wasn't even formed. You didn't really even have a government. You didn't have a sense of who we are as America. There frankly wasn't polls to be part of. So of course it'd be very polarized. Yeah. We do know who we are. We do have a government. We do have a history. And now we're back to being as polarized as when we didn't know who the hell we were. That does not seem good. Am I misinterpreting this?
I kind of like that way. I never thought about it in exactly those terms. We know who we are. Do we not know who we are? And kind of not knowing who we are as a culture and a country, I think that does kind of capture this. At least, there are sort of divided camps as to who we are and who we aspire to be. So, yeah, I think that does capture things kind of nicely.
Some people have said that polarization goes back to the 1990s, 1992, the Clinton presidency. They point out something called the big sort. This idea that Americans are ideologically sorting themselves into like-minded communities, at least from the 90s on. And that's why you're getting such a polarized electorate, is that counties are becoming more hardcore red instead of purple. They're just all red or all blue. So that's what they're pointing at, is that, which kind of is interesting. You pointed out Clinton. That's why I wanted to ask you for, what did you feel? Because your observations were anecdotes, but they line up with the data perfectly. So I wanted to see if I could pull that out of you. Let me run something by you, and I'd like to get your opinion, if I may. So a lot of people have said, hey, we've had worse times here in America before. The 1960s, way more violent than now. I wasn't around then, but I did a lot of reading. People were getting shot, etc. And they were marches on Washington and riots after Martin Luther King died, et cetera, was assassinated. Not good. But they would say, I feel the polarization is worse now than the 1960s for this reason. It's not as violent, but in the 1960s, everybody had common institutions. They believed in the authority of Congress. They believed in the authority of elections. They followed the will of the Supreme Court. Now we have the Lieutenant Governor of California, world's fifth largest economy, second most powerful person, world's fifth largest economy, 4 months ago said, I will defy the Supreme Court. No one criticized her. Now we have people saying, I don't know, let's just ignore what the Supreme Court says because I don't really like them. Oh, did you think your guy won the election? I'm going to doubt that for 4 years. Oh, did you think your guy won the election? I'm going to doubt that for 4 years. And then you can look at the Pew Research poll showing the lowest faith in every branch of the federal government except the military in 40 years.
Yeah.
At least in the 60s, they all had these common institutions to hold them together. People are saying we don't have that now, and that is much worse than what was going on in the 1960s. Thoughts, feelings?
Yeah, no, I think that's basically correct. I think it goes well beyond Congress and the government. I mean, certainly you don't have the faith in the mass media that one you had in the 60s and 70s. The media, I mean, I did live through the protests of the 60s and 70s, and there was, media had their perspectives. This might be on the editorial pages, you might have a right-leaning or a left-leaning newspaper. But when it came to the news, the general take was that the news was the news.
Right.
And it's correctly, I think, it's no longer taken for granted that the news is the news, as opposed to some slant on the news. So, it's similar. It is a little ironic to me, but I think you've had less of a decline in trust in, of all things, academia compared to, say, Congress or the mass media. But I also think that's because people don't know how extreme the skew is in academia. When they do, there's good evidence for this. There's actually a book, One Nation, Two Realities, by two social scientists. I think they were political scientists. I'm not sure about that. One on the left, one on the right. There's tons of data in there. But one of the surveys they conducted compared people's sort of trust in this or belief in the credibility of academia, and they related that to how extreme the political skew was in academia. And regardless of whether they were on the left or the right, the more politically skewed people believed academia was, the less credibility they put in it. So that's just a long way of saying you have the declining trust in institutions across the board compared to 50 or 60 years ago. And for good reason.
Exactly. And maybe we would have more people put more faith in academia if we had studies that were at least peer reviewed by people who definitely had a conservative background from a conservative university, instead of just professors who pretty much are on the left to whatever degree and work only at leftist universities, which they consider mainstream, which I do too, but still, the conservatives don't. So how are you going to reach out to 70 million people?
And let's be clear, if somebody's publishing a paper on the development of a new chemical compound to make a stronger ceramic, probably, if the entire team is people on the left, that hardly matters. But if they're doing research on the nature and sources of gender gaps in the corporate boardroom, well, then that's where their politics might play a role.
What if I do a study on agricultural conditions based only on California's Mediterranean climate and say that works for all of America? And then when people try to apply my research and their crops die, I go, you must have got it wrong.
Right. So that's the overgeneralization problem. And that's sort of well known throughout the social sciences anyway. I don't know so much about the natural sciences, where that problem was particularly acute in psychology until fairly recently, where psychologists did studies based on intropsych subject pools. So in many psychology programs, the students taking their first introductory psychology course can usually meet a requirement by agreeing to volunteer for psychology experiments. So this was very convenient, very easy to run zillions of studies. And so through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even into the early 2000s, the overwhelming majority of psychology studies were on intro psych students. And then were written as if they applied to all of humanity, which was absurd. So, the overgeneralizing is a bad thing. Now, the part of the problem, though, in academia is there are incentives for persuading the world that your work is important, right? In corporate research, it has to actually work so that you can develop a product that you actually make money on. But in academia, it's just about convincing other people that it's important. And one way to do that is to write it as if you have dramatic implications for all of humanity, when in fact, you might have minor implications for a tiny sliver of humanity.
Right. I'm trying to find the big sort. And I really appreciate you talking about the biases in academia. We really haven't had anybody who is willing to do that. I wanted to show you this one map and see what your opinion was, because a lot of my questions come from this. Give me a second. It's almost here. It's coming up. Okay, here we go. So the big sort's been documented by NPR 538. There's some NPR reporting on it going back to 2008, 2017.
Yep.
Basically saying people are culturally or politically sorting themselves out. There is debate on if people are doing it intentionally. They're going, I want to move to a place where people vote this way, or if they have some sort of general lifestyle cue that they consciously or subconsciously aware of. I really don't care. I'm more just interested in, is it happening or is it not? Maybe people are conscious about it. Maybe they're subconscious about it. Are they doing it? Well, according to this map, New York Times published 2016. Bishop's book, The Big Sort, came out in the 90s, I think. So this is like 20 years after the book. And they're saying, yeah, totally correct still, 20 years later.
Yeah.
So they're talking about landslide election counties. These maps are of counties for presidential elections. If you look at the top left map, top left, red means don't run here if you're not a Republican. You have no chance of winning. Republicans win by 20 percentage points or more over Democrat. It's called a landslide. You have no chance. And that's not opinion. That's well-accepted political science. Blue means don't even run here if you're a Republican. Democrats win by 20 points. But gray means sometimes we vote for McCain, and sometimes we think Barack Obama has the right message for where the country is at this moment. We're supposed to not look at their skin color or their background, but think about the message. And do they have the right idea for leadership based upon the problems the country's facing at that time? Yeah. That's what you're supposed to do as a voter, however you interpret the answer, but that's what you're supposed to be doing. So if you look at 1992, you can go all the way over to 2000. Bottom row is middle row is 2004 to 2012. The one at the bottom on the left is 2016. So the very bottom on the left is 2016. And what you can see from 1992 to 2016 is that all the grays wiped out, basically. So in 30 years, we've gone from having half or majority competitive election counties to almost all of them being wiped out. I'm in one of the last remaining areas of competitive election counties here in the Central Valley, where Republicans win by 51%, but Democrats win by 51%. So there's still there's a competition. You can't say don't even run. It's someone wins, but just barely, and which seems good for democracy. As I understand, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Does this look legitimate and rational? Is this something you could believe in, or like some professors I've showed this maps to? Does this make sense to you? I reject those maps. I've never seen them before, but I reject them.
No, they're totally legitimate in the sense of describing the reality. I mean, that, now is the reality rational? That's a different question than whether these maps legitimately describe the reality. So let's separate those two things. But yeah, the maps, I've seen things like these maps as completely consistent with all the data on what has been called the big sort. Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely true. That is evident. It's exactly what everything you just described about the nature of that is exactly right. There's fewer and fewer over the decades. There are fewer and fewer contested congressional districts. Most are now safe districts. There's a very small number relative to the 435 congressional seats. There's very few that are seriously contested. Way fewer than there were 30 years ago. So that's just descriptively true.
You heard it from him. I didn't. So, fellow liberals, do not call me. Okay, the professor said it. He's a professor. He's allowed to have his opinions. That's why we wanted him on the show.
The data are the data. You know,
you hear him? He said the data. Go after the data. Don't call me. Going, I can't you believe you? It's
I live in
true.
a contested district. Also, it actually.
We both don't like Trump. Okay, but facts are facts. Okay, I'm sorry. Facts hurt sometimes. Okay, just that was for my own patoot to be protected. Since you've confirmed, okay, so let me get super mega scary. Your social psychology, understanding of groups relating to other groups. For 30 years, you've increasingly become polarized. First, it was, I hate that President Clinton and the news media tells me so. We've never seen that vitriol. Then it was, I hate this President Bush and he did the Iraq war and that's bad. Then there was some pushback on Obama. Then you had the Tea Party come out. Oh, and then you had Newt Gingrich in the 1990s say our parties don't hang out with each other. Then you have Obama. Then you have the Tea Party. Then you have Obama react to the Tea Party. And then you have Trump. And then you have the left react to Trump by saying Russia put you in office for 4 years, which has been proven to be completely untrue. But we had to wait till the last 6 months after 4 years of them saying it to find that out. The amount of Russian interference was no more than 1%, according to what research says. And then in a reaction to that, the right goes, oh, January 6th, you know. So it's, oh yeah, I'll do I've heard, and I thought I thought of this analogy first, but I thought it was a stupid analogy until I saw a couple professors bring it up. My brother and I, when we were boys, played this game that annoyed the hell out of my mom. I didn't hit you that hard. You hit me harder than I hit you. No, I didn't. I just did this. Are you weak? Oh, let me show you how hard I hit you. Okay, well, let me show you how hard you hit me. Well, let me show you. Well, let me show you. Well, let me show you. And then the next thing you know, you're punching each other. And then you look, your mom's like mad and you go, well, hold on, I just barely touched him. Because that's what you were saying in your head the whole time. Right. You don't realize how far it's escalated and you were part of this. With your psychological background, with your social psychology background, 200 million people go from occasionally debating each other to now mostly viewing the other side as the enemy and a threat to America, not just thinking differently, threat to America, enemy. And now we have over half of Americans do not want anyone in their family dating anyone in the other party.
Yeah.
So that I've heard some people go, it's only the elites who are polarized. And I'm like, the elites made 55% of every American say, I don't want you dating someone from the other party. Right. I mean, that's a personal decision.
Yeah.
Can you get people to unlearn all of this hate and othering at the other and undo 33 decades of segregation like we've seen this?
Well, I mean, at the individual level, right? Like at one person at a time, sure. You can do that. And, the straightforward way to do that is to interact with reasonable, sane, benevolent people from the other side and see, well, no, they're not all these demons I seem to have concocted. The problem with that society-wide is the big sword. That is, you don't really have an opportunity to do that very often if you live and work basically in an echo chamber. and you know what bounces around is how evil the other side is. So you don't really have an opportunity to see, well, no, that they're not really. Some of them may be evil, but plenty of them are just as benevolent as anybody else. They just kind of think differently, and if you kind of listen, they might actually say some interesting things. But you just don't get it. It's much rarer to have the opportunity to have that experience because of the big sword.
Thank you. I had been thinking that. I had thought that. I asked a professor this week that, the first time I asked that, and she backed it up. And you are the first professor in anything I've seen who's actually brought that up on your own. That, hey, there's this solution. Get out there and go meet the other and talk to them. And this is what I said to the other professor. I go, okay, I'm in downtown San Francisco, California. And I went to my local Starbucks and I met a guy who says he's a Republican and he's cool with gay rights just like me. See, we have no division. And I was like, okay. I'm a liberal, but I live in rural Kentucky, like dad, like granddad. And I kind of dress and have the same industry. But if you ask me, I think differently. And I'm cool with people having shotguns in their home because, hey, wolves are there. See, no division between liberals and Republicans. And what actually has to happen is the guy from San Francisco has to go out or call or meet the guy from Nebraska. You can't go to the same dude in your same voting block and go, oh, I'm on the other side, because they're generally going to think and vote like you, according to psychology. So you have to travel far. You have to go really far to go meet someone from the other side, like a New Yorker going to Iowa.
Yeah. Yes. That's literally true.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nobody brings that up. You're the first person to ever bring that up. The only other professor ever talked about it was because I brought it to him. So that's 2 out of 70.
Yeah, no, there's good evidence from this within social psychology. It's called the contact hypothesis. The evidence on it is mixed, but there is, the best evidence for it is that if you meet people from a group that you're in conflict with in some way, and you have positive interactions with those people, it actually reduces hostility and prejudice. There's pretty good evidence for that. Yeah.
Sure. And I have been I'm an ex-Republican. I quit in 2012 because I thought the party was not going to accept Latinos. That was 4 years before Trump. Boy, did I call it right. But I've also been able to get along with conservatives very well because I have a lot of family in Texas. So I had to go visit them. I had to grow up with them as my cousins. I had to see the other side. So before this division got bad, I already knew there was a big difference between Texas and California. There's always been a huge difference between Texas and California, but they were my family. And so I was forced to kind of feel familial towards them, which cut down on the amount of, it insulated me. It insulated me from the amount of vitriol I could feel. Because I was like, well, that's cousin Jerry. I mean, yeah, he's a little country, but do you really think that he, wants to overthrow the government and shoot everybody down? No, I don't. Do I think he thinks Trump is a savior? Yeah. But no, you have this limit because you actually know them as people, but that's my family in California knows a bunch of people in Texas. And so we have a reason to call each other over the last 20 to 30 years. If you don't have that, I'm wondering how you're going to get this connection with the other person. Because out of everyone I've talked to, I've heard a couple professors and people in books say, you got to go meet the other person and have a quality interaction with them. And I go, great. Have you done that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, my version of that is for the purpose of improving the science. I mean, this sort of goes back to the first part of the discussion we were having, that the social sciences on political and politicized topics needs conservatives. The fact that I'm not a conservative is irrelevant, that this is necessary for the quality of the science, the validity of the science on political issues. It's also necessary for the public trust it's crucial for the public to justifiably trust the academics for the academics to have people from across the political spectrum. Because if there's not somebody on your side saying, yes, this is really true, why should you believe that the thing's actually true and not just political axe grinding masquerading as science? So I have in some ways a very conventional progressive diversity statement on my faculty webpage that my lab's open to people from
Okay.
groups, regardless of race and
Yeah.
gender identity and stuff. But I also have something in there about religion and politics, which is very unusual for a conventional progressive statement. And as a result, I routinely attract students. I mean, there are not very many graduate students who are right of center. I only half jokingly describe my experience as cornering the market on right-wing social psychology students because they're attracted.
Not hard to do.
I know, that's right. That's right. And I have been Marcus. I'm happy to argue with them about politics when we're doing politics, but when it comes to doing social science, this has been one of the best things that I have ever done in my entire career. They are brilliant. They are hardworking. They really do think differently. They want to do different kinds of research than conventional sort of lefty social scientists. And it's just been great working with these. Many of them are now former students. They've been incredibly productive and have allowed my research to address questions in different ways than I would otherwise have done. It's been great. It's been absolutely great.
If you guys are all actual scientists and you are all actually dedicated to academia, then it shouldn't matter what your political perspective should be. When you do a peer-reviewed journal, you should say, damn it, I was really hoping the hypothesis was going to back up my conservative view. It didn't. I have to concede that because I'm a scientist and I'm trained to go where the data does. And unfortunately, I'm going to go cry for the next week. But I will admit that But I will bring myself to write down, yes, you're right. The data backs that up. I hate this, but the data backs that up. I'm not going to lie. And that's how we've progressed for 1,500 years is that humans to do that.
Yeah.
And it seems to be going away. And I'm like, how are we going to progress when nobody wants to say the awful conclusion? I really wanted it to be X. It's not. I'm kind of depressed, but it's Y. We have to acknowledge it's Y. So we can evolve as humans. And good, my hat's off to you, but I see a lot of room for improvement. Let me ask you something. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I get it. Some people like her, some people don't. When she came out with her statement, her controversial tweet on President's Day saying we needed a national divorce because the red and the blue cannot live together, it was inartful and lacking details and left a lot of speculation and a lot of chaos. Okay, I get it. But you and I are also saying polarization is real. Now, maybe her solution isn't the right one, but there's something there. In response to her tweet, a Utah governor said, oh, Marjorie, you're wrong. We don't need a national divorce. We need national marriage counseling. That was picked up by 30 different newspapers, mainstream, across America, and reprinted kind of with a tongue-in-cheek sort of narrative of, Marjorie, you're stupid. We need marriage counseling, not national divorce. Yet, although it was picked up by 30 different newspapers, not one could define what it meant. In fact, nobody defined what it meant. Many people printed it, said, here's the solution, and yet they never said exactly what does that look like. What does, coming from a professional background, what does marriage counseling that's successful look like for a population of 200 to 300 million people who are as polarized as we have not seen since the 1790s, and this has gone on for 3 decades. Who does that marriage counseling? How long does it take? And does it snap everything back into place? And can you name someone who could be that marriage counselor?
Okay, so basically my answers are no across the board. I mean, I am sympathetic. I'm sympathetic to the sentiment, right? The kind of the feel of the marriage counseling comment is, okay, we're kind of dysfunctional, and what we need is someone wiser and willing to embrace all of us to try to bring us back together to overcome our dysfunctions. And as a sentiment, I'm kind of, that appeals. I have to admit that does appeal to me.
Okay.
But that doesn't answer any of the questions you pose to me. I have no clue how to do that, and I'm not going to, claim that I do. So
can't AOC, come together with Donald Trump and they hug each other and say, guys, we need to give each other more hugs and just be nicer. And they do that on a nationally televised address. Would that magically snap everybody back into place?
I don't know that I have an answer. I'm totally winging it here. But
fair. But you also need the background to wing it.
One type of answer would be if our political leadership actually engaged in more of that kind of behavior. I'm talking about Congress, the House, the Senate, the major parties. If they embraced compromise, talking to each other, and kind of modeled that for the public, I think that would help. I think that would help. Now, I don't see much of that happening anytime soon.
Let's say next year, 90% of Congress, presidency, Supreme Court, it's like they just had a mind change. And suddenly they were very nice and cordial to each other. And they did joint press conferences. And, I disagree with you. I didn't say that I agree with your policies, but I want to be more cordial to you. How many years of that behavior does it take before we unwind everything we've seen over the last 3 decades?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that either. So I really don't know. It would take a long time because the country is really riven in lots of ways, and so a couple of feel good moments isn't going to do it. It's going to probably take years and maybe decades. That would be my guess. But I would be years. It would be years and maybe decades, and it would need a sustained effort by the political leadership. But as far as I can tell, especially with the big sort and with the constituencies of the elected representatives so one-sidedly partisan, their incentives are to play to their base. They're not to, and if they spend too much time compromising with the other side in primaries, they're going to be tagged as traitors and turncoats and black sheep and all sorts of fake Republicans, rhinos on the right, or kind of proto-fascists if they're Democrats, making compromises with Republicans. So I don't see how the incentives line up to encourage that. So I don't see it happening anytime soon.
It reminds me when they and I'm not a Trump fan, but when they blew up Iranian General Qasem Soleimani of the Quds Brigade, that guy had killed 32, maybe over 100 Americans. And I'm not celebrating him. That's Trump's win. Hell no. In fact, I'll spread newspaper articles about talking about how maybe he was a victim. He murdered dozens to over 100 Americans, and leftist newspapers started talking about Trump's a bad guy for killing him, and no leftist would back him. We can't even support Americans when they get justice for people who kill hundreds of Americans.
Yeah. Yes.
Good sign, bad sign?
That's terrible. That's completely terrible.
I wasn't sure.
Listen, you can despise Trump and still recognize that he had some pretty major accomplishments.
I'll give you the other one. When Barack Obama with SEAL Team 6 was able to bring justice to Osama bin Laden, a lot of Republicans they just couldn't celebrate it that hard. They kind of go, okay, good job. And I'm like, I'm here. There was a bunch of them. And I'm like, why aren't you guys driving up and down with your American flags in the back, yelling and hollering? Because if there was any other terrorist leader got killed, that's what would be going on. And with Obama, they're like, yeah, I guess he did a good job. Which is not good. But even that begrudging acknowledgement was more than liberals gave Trump.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing 2 presidents, 2 events. 9/11 style events should have brought us together.
Yeah.
Absolutely did not at all, back to back.
Right. Yeah. No,
Uh,
that's right.
so here's my next question for you. Marjorie Taylor Greene made her statement about national divorce. The first month, the media wrote 30 newspaper articles saying there's no polarization. Marjorie, you're an idiot. When that did not stop the conversation, the very next month, they came out with a new narrative. Okay, there's polarization, but it's because of social media. It's because of extreme politicians. It's because of gerrymandering. 30 newspapers, not one of them could mention the big sort at all, even if their newspaper had previously reported on it. How
That's
did
amazing.
30
I didn't know this.
newspapers all forget about the big sort when it predates social media, extreme politicians, and gerrymandering by 10 to 20 years, and they had previously reported on it? How did 30 newspapers forget to even mention this phenomenon when it's been around longer and has a larger trail of publications documenting it?
Yeah, I have no answer to that. This is the generic topic is you can't assume stories in the media are necessarily correct. That's the general topic, and this is just a prototypical case. That's a broad spectrum problem.
Sure. Can I run a crazy theory by you? And you just tell me if this is crazy. This is my theory, and if you think it's crazy, say, wow, that's crazy. But if you don't think it's not so crazy, maybe you'd say that. It's up to you. It's a question I've asked a few professors. Again, if you think this is crazy, say so directly to the audience, please. That's what we want. Here's my theory. Social media is a problem around 2015. Well, if we just passed a law, we could regulate the social media companies. And if we just passed a law, we could fix gerrymandering. And if we just passed a law, we could, maybe work on the primary system and get more moderate politicians in there. And these are things that if Congress came together, we could pass a law and probably fix in 1 to 2 years, maybe 3 to 5. But if it's the American people themselves, and it's not the elites, and it's a problem of 200 million people sorting themselves over 30 years, there is no law that's going to change that. There is no quick fix. It's a 3-decade painful, slow, long process that maybe you win sometime in the year 2050. That's depressing. Let's not talk about it at all. Crazy theory?
No, it's definitely not crazy. I
don't want to talk about depressing problems. Let's just focus on things that are quick and simple answers and not even discuss the possibility that something could be a really long, troubling, oh my God, you're screwed response is your only way out.
Well, I mean, deep societal issues and problems rarely have simple, easy, and quick solutions. So the decades thing is probably right, but I'd unpack several of those things. First of all, it's not clear the extent to which social media has exacerbated polarization versus simply reflected it. That's actually not clear. And on general free speech grounds, I don't think the government should be in the business of regulating social media. There might be exceptions around the fringes. Maybe I'd have to see the specifics, but for the most part, government restricting anything having to do with speech is illegal in the United States. You can't do it, with rare exceptions. So, regulating social media, I don't want to be absolutist about it, but is probably generally a bad idea. Gerrymandering, that's subject to legal decisions and stuff. And I think both parties do it. I think it's bad. It has, I think, contributed to the, I don't know if it's contributed to the polarization per se, and it hasn't contributed to the sorting either, but it probably has contributed to some degree to the loss of contested districts. And I do think contested districts are good for the country. So that could be addressed by law to some degree. So I'd separate those issues. And in in any long-term attempt to improve some societal condition, in general principle, you do what you can do. And if one of the things we can do is limit or reduce gerrymandering, I think that'd be a good thing, actually.
Yeah, that's a good reaction. That's a good reaction. So social media, can you tell me a little bit more about this? Because everyone's saying it's all social media's fault. After Trump, it's social media. And if we just got rid of social media, everything snaps back into place. Sounds like you're saying that might not be true. What are you talking about, Professor?
Social media's explosion is new enough. It takes years to research stuff like this and reach any sort of firm scientifically justified conclusion. So the research on the social media effects on things like polarization and the big sort and all that sort of stuff is relatively new. There's been plenty of studies on it, but the evidence is mixed. The evidence regarding the extent to which social media has caused polarization is actually mixed. Some stuff shows that it does seem to exacerbate polarization. Some stuff showing that it doesn't exacerbate polarization, just reflects the existing polarization. So I think there's just a lot it's not well understood at this point, the extent to which social media actually causes polarization. Lord knows you have people grandstanding all the time on social media, insulting each other. The left calls the right fascist, the right calls the left communist, Marxist, cultural Marxist. There's the whole right. You have that whole sort of thing, and that looks like social media is polarizing the country, but in my opinion, it probably mostly reflects the existing polarization and people sort of exploiting social media for their own naked self-interest to build their own audiences and all that sort of stuff. So it's really just not, the role of social media is very, very unclear. And politically, again, this country is built on sort of bedrock protections of individual liberties. That's what the First Amendment is all about. The Due Process Amendment, the Fifth Amendment is all about. It's about free speech. It's about freedom of religion, freedom of association, freedom of press. So I just don't want, I don't want the government or other authorities messing with any of that too much, including on social media.
Well, hold on, Professor. You're a fellow liberal. I'm a liberal. All this fake news and bad facts being put out by conservatives. Yep. How do we make sure it's all fake? I mean, that's why we have polarization. That's what I see on the news. It's all fake news. And if we had something, say, a federal government Ministry of Fact Checking, which was actually proposed and staffed and implemented, then we could make sure that, that person who was going to be the head of the Ministry of Staff tweeted out misinformation, but we can look past that and go on, what's the good thing? Well, not a good idea for the government to tell us what to think and feel?
No. What? That's my answer, is no.
Okay. So even when
free speech comes with the right of people to promote falsehoods. That's inherent to the right of free speech.
Okay. Ministry of Fact Checking, not good. What about the federal government going behind the scenes, lying to the public and telling Twitter what comments to pull and what comments to allow, as was revealed in the Twitter files? Good thing, bad thing?
They're very bad. Very, very bad.
Doesn't say
the government should not be in the business of even attempting to regulate or pressure speech.
So what does it say to you that we had one political party, when they get into office, use the arms and levers of power of the government to limit the speech of the other political party? Does that say stable functioning democracy to you or something else?
No, now that's it's very bad. It's very, very bad. But you also have that on the right. You have that with the slew of state bills seeking to prevent, especially in higher ed, discussion of divisive concepts, critical race theory, all that sort of stuff. So now I think a lot of that stuff is nonsense, but that doesn't really matter. Both academic freedom and free speech absolutely protect people's right to promote nonsense. And the way you get a robust civil society is by letting people say whatever the hell they have to say, and the rest of us get a chance to evaluate it and figure it out. And you don't suppressing speech, whether it's done by the left to the right or by the right to the left, is a harbinger of authoritarianism, and sort of corrupts and corrodes the ability of the society to figure out its best ways forward.
So we're not just stopping hate speech. Because that's what I hear, right? Like, we can't have Milo whatever his name is, Yiannopoulos at these different California universities, because that's not freedom of speech. That's just hate speech. And we don't learn anything from it, even though he says something that we've never heard before. So we can just kick him out and not hear it. And that's cool, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, so the free speech, first was hate speech has no legal definition in the United States. So it's not even clear what that means, and kind of what that translates into. It translates into any speech that I find sufficiently offensive. And, offensive speech is specifically protected by the First Amendment as per a slew of Supreme Court rulings. So, and the worst problem of that is, as soon as you permit someone to ban hate speech, all that needs to have happen is the other party gets into power, label your views hate speech, and now you don't get a chance to speak. So the whole banning hate speech is a disaster.
When they did at Ministry of Truth, and then it came out a week later that she had promoted falsehoods without checking her facts before she printed it, I'm like, God, wow. You can't make this up. This is a poll that was taken 1 or 2 years ago by this, let's see here, Center for Politics, Sabato Cristobal, University of Virginia, Center for Politics, September 30th, 2021, about 2 years ago. What it shows is this: 74% of Biden voters and 78% of Trump voters feel all voters from the other party are, quote, a clear and present danger to the USA. I shortened it to the word danger. The phrase they used was clear and present danger, a phrase typically used for a 9/11 style attack or a Russian nuclear strike.
Right.
Now let me read you something else. So the thing is that the right when Marjorie Taylor Greene made her tweet about we need to have a national divorce, like I said, the second month started to look into the causes, but the very first month, 30 different newspapers said, you're an idiot. There's no division in America. I remember Stephen Colbert did the night show, and he goes, Marjorie Taylor Greene says we need a national divorce because everyone she talks to backs her up. Right, Marge. Like she's a total idiot, and there's nothing to this at all. I remember watching Crystal Ball on Breaking Points and Anna Kasparian on the Young Turks, and they literally said what she's talking about. What are you talking about, Marjorie? Here's these opinion polls that show everybody agrees we need gun regulation and free access to abortions, and all the Dems were able to pull out all these polls that showed everyone agreed with the Dems, so we're not divided. And then the next month they started admitting the truth. And I found that interesting because I was reading this book for part of this research. Maybe you've heard of this book. It's called Collapse by Jared Diamond.
Yeah, I know of it, but I have not read it. So
Jared Diamond is one of the most preeminent sociologists on earth. Collapse is one of the most preeminent sociology books and anthropology books on earth. Basically, it's the most in-depth study of how societies over the last 10,000 years of recorded history have collapsed.
Yeah.
And in the back, he has a chapter on why do some societies make disastrous decisions? Why do these societies collapse? If I can, I'd like to read you one paragraph and ask you your question.
Yeah, this is great.
This is from Professor Jared Diamond. What I'm going to propose instead is a roadmap of factors contributing to failures of group decision-making. I'll divide the factors into fuzzily delineated sequences of 4 categories. First of all, a group may fail to anticipate a problem before the problem actually arrives. Secondly, when the problem does arrive, the group may fail to perceive it. Then after they perceive it, they may even fail to even try to solve it. Finally, they may try to solve it, but may not succeed. He was listing 4 ways people can screw up, one of which is they don't solve it. They tried, they failed. The other is they don't even recognize the problem. But the middle two are they don't even really appreciate the problem, the significance of it, talk about it, or take it seriously to fix it. And that was 50% of the reason why every major society that collapsed over the last 10,000 years collapsed. Now we hear in 2023, political division is an issue. We are at levels of polarization not seen since the formation of the country. No, Marjorie, you're an idiot. Don't even talk about it, you stupid, dumb idiot. There's nothing here. Does that seem like a good way to solve problems, given that we know polarization is happening? Or does that sound like exactly what Jared Diamond says leads to collapse of societies? Which one, in your opinion, Professor? I don't know what you think. You're the professor.
You're implicitly preaching to the choir here. Listen, I'm definitely from the camp of you're better off knowing that you have a problem, trying to detect that you have a problem, and then trying to do something about it, than pretending there's no there. And that's almost always true. This for the individual person, that's true for cancer. You're better off actually going to your doctor than not going to the doctor because you don't want to find out. I'm in the camp, no, you actually do want to find out. It's in your interest to find out. It's the same thing, that same principle is society-wide. If we have a serious problem, we kind of need to know about it and talk about it. Sometimes you have alarmism. You have people raising alarms about problems that are not that serious, but and sometimes it's hard to know what problems are really serious and which need to be prioritized. But that's actually one of the reasons you need kind of unfettered free speech, so that society-wide you can have those conversations and try to get at an understanding of what are the most serious problems that you then do your best, with no guarantee of success, to address before they become like sort of ruining the entire society, leading to the kind of collapse that you and Jared Diamond are apparently talking about.
So if you have a cancerous lump on your leg and I come to you and I say, that could be cancer, you should be a doctor. And you say, don't say that. That's being negative. You don't know. So I'm just going to assume it's not cancer and not go to the doctor because then I can't confirm it's cancer. That's not a smart way to solve problems. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. Yes.
Oh, okay. Hey, folks, we asked the experts. Right, I'm not. This is what the experts said. This isn't my.
I'm not sure that's informed by any of my expertise. It's just like basic common sense, really.
Oh, it's just basic common sense.
That is what I would
say. That you
yeah.
should face problems as an adult and have adult discussions instead of name calling and saying, "Don't talk about that, you idiot." Yes, well, hey, you learn something new every day. You learn something new. I got to call my mom. Because I told her that she was wrong. She was like, that's not how you talk to people. And I go, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You insult people, you don't acknowledge their facts, and then you say they're stupid for bringing up the problem. And that's how you have constructive dialogue. And she's like, you're wrong. I go, you don't know what you're talking about.
You sound like, that sounds like academia to me most of the time. I got to make a phone call.
Mom, yeah, it turns out you don't treat people like trash when you want them to not hate you. No, I just found out. Yeah, Professor, I've got to go do the interview. Okay, I'll be back. Love you. Okay, so hey, learn something new every day. Who knew? Who knew? We are winding down. I want to say thank you for coming out. Here's the question I typically ask people as we go out. I hope that you found this is a fair interview. We did not set you up or do gotcha journalism or try to put words in your mouth. You've got to speak your piece. I hope you felt we did a fair job here.
This has been delightful.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations? Do you know anybody who, you don't have to, but do you know anybody who might be willing to have a intelligent conversation? They could be on the left, they could be on the right, they could hate the idea, love the idea, but they could actually form complete thoughts. Anybody you know who might be willing to talk with us?
I would really recommend, I don't know if she would talk to you, but I mean, after this experience, I could recommend it, is Corey Clark. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, working on a major project to encourage what has come to be called adversarial collaborations.
Ooh.
And that is to encourage people, researchers, scholars, who have taken deeply opposing positions, whether political or theoretical or anything else, on some social science topic, together to sort of hammer out the best ways to study the topic that would resolve those differences. So I think she would be very, very interesting.
Oh, done. Done. We will definitely reach out to her. Corey Clark, University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I can give you contact information for her. So.
Oh, please, that'd be awesome. Corey Jane Clark studied a PhD at Irvine. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, please. We would love to be introduced to her. We're always trying to keep the conversation going. And again, for anybody watching, you could be on the right. You could be on the left. You could be a professor. You could just be an activist. I don't care. If you've been around, you have some thoughts. We want to get as many different thoughtful perspectives out to you guys. So if you see anybody, you know anybody, that's what we're trying to do. Because we think, I got started with this because I saw an NPR article, and we were talking about the bias of academia on this. I saw an NPR article, and they interviewed 3 professors, all from coastal Pacific universities, so they're all left. And they basically concluded, yeah, it's mostly the Republicans' fault. And then NPR concludes and goes, well-rounded review.
This is classic. Yeah.
3 professors is well-rounded. 3 professors is well-rounded, let alone they're all on one side. There was no diversity of opinion. They didn't even give one professor 2 sentences to go, well, I have a different perspective. I think nothing like that. And I was like, oh, my God. I guess I'm going to have to jump in because that is garbage journalism.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, last question we ask. It's a week from now. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third party. You don't know who this person is. You don't know what they look like. You don't know their name. You know nothing about them. But they watched this interview, and they thought it was pretty informative. But 5 days from now, we're saying, wow, there was a lot to that interview. They covered a lot. I don't remember it all clearly, but there was this one thing the professor said, and I cannot get out of my head. What is that one thought you want a random person you've never met who watched this whole interview to not be able to get out of their head 5 days from now?
Oh, man. That is a really, really tough one. I would say the one thing that I would want them to not get out of their head is that this level of political polarization is unhealthy for the country, and that if they can do their part to be a better listener to the other side, then that's probably time and effort well spent. That's what I would want them to get. I suspect that's not going to be what they actually get out of it. So
we can all have our wants and dreams. There was a sci-fi show called Dark Matter, and it only had 2 seasons, and I was really upset. I want a 3rd season, so that's something I want. I don't know if it's going to happen, but we can all have our. Is there anything you wanted to cover? Anything you wanted to talk about? Questions you had for us? Something you wanted to say that you felt you weren't able to explain? Anything at all?
No, I think we covered this ground pretty well.
Okay,
so thank you. We'll
leave it there. I'll email you a copy of the video in a little bit, and I want to say thank you for coming out. I had a good time. This was fun. It's a serious subject, and I like to laugh a little bit. I don't like to dumb down the topic, but I like to have a few laughs because it's just too damn serious all the time.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's too serious to not occasionally laugh about it.
That's what I'm saying. Just occasionally, we're not trying to dumb down the topic or make the topic seem like we don't take it seriously. But as human beings, you need a little bit of levity if you're wading.
Absolutely.
Okay. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Professor. I'll email you shortly, and I want to say thank you for coming out.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Okay.